Welcome to this episode of the She Builds Tech Skills program in North America. I'm your host, Yusra Al Sharafi, and I'm a solutions architect here at AWS based out of Toronto. I've been at AWS for about 3 years, and I cover enterprise customers in Canada. So for past sessions on the YouTube channel, check out the link below and subscribe to our channel. Today, we bring you three special guests, Upasana, Arti, and Harshita from AWS. We'll learn about their journey with supporting a semiconductor customer and modernizing their data platform using AWS services. Let's meet the team that made it all happen. Over to you, Arti.
So going way back, I grew up in a home, thanks to my dad, that where I was always exposed to the latest technologies, whether it was the latest stereo equipment to listen to Bollywood tunes or our first PC and copying code from PC Magazine with my brother. So I've always been very interested in tech, but was trying to find my place because even in the 90s, it was a very male dominated space. But going off to college and having some great discussions with my professors, I did learn that you could focus in technology. The changes are so rapid, which I loved, and I could maintain my passion for continuous learning and tie it back to the business value. So be a translator of sorts at a time when tech was really starting to change the world and educate people on how technology can be used to solve real problems in a business. Interestingly enough, my career has progressed in parallel to the way most large companies have evolved over the last 30 years. And very quickly, I learned from my customers, they don't want to maintain their own hardware. They wanted a services approach. And being really tuned in, it became apparent that public cloud was the way of the future. So that brings me to my role here at AWS. I joined AWS 4 years ago and I have never looked back. It's just awesome to work for an organization where innovation is so part of that core, it's ingrained, and I work with some of the best and brightest minds that I can learn from.
Awesome. Thanks, Arti. And over to you, Upasana, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your role.
Yeah, definitely, Yusra. And thank you so much, Aarti, for sharing this story. Coincidentally, I have a similar story to share. And no wonder, Aarti, why we get along so well, because I think our journey has been similar. And let me start with sharing this little bit incident from my teenage, right, that I still remember. And hopefully that will resonate well with our viewers as well. So I was a senior in high school, and we are having that stressful conversation about which degree I should pursue with my parents. And I still remember that telling my father that when I close my eyes and only thing that I can envision is doing something with the laptop, I don't see myself really doing any other profession. And I'm very grateful to my parents. They say, you know what, then go for it. So they really encouraged me to pursue my dream, my passion, and I followed my bliss, and that is how my journey started. After pursuing a degree in computer science, my first job was in academics. I used to teach my students computer fundamentals, programming, C++, Java. I had a good command on application side. Really, what I gained from it is, of course, the technical depth is very important. We are in computer science field. But the other part of the equation is being emotionally intelligent. So I really learned those soft skills, which became my superpower eventually. And I give the same advice to everyone that don't undermine your soft skills and refine them and fine tune them as you grow in your career. As much as I love academics and then wanted to grow in that field, but the learn and the curious part of me also wanted to experience the corporate culture. So when I came to United States, my corporate journey started with joining a global consulting firm as a hands-on developer, ASP, .NET, Java. Then I did little bit of in big data, data analytics, visualization, SQL, Oracle, store procedures. So during my tenure with this consulting company, I have had so many roles, right? I was technical, hands-on developer, architect, program manager, program lead, and all that. I learned a lot. I served four different industries: pharma, education, construction. So that made me very adaptable. I'm a quick learner. And then I was presented with this really good offer from a utility company to start their business solution group from inception. And I was responsible for a digital transformation of a $1 billion business. So I took it. And that's how my journey started. Once again, I have led their transformation projects, their agile DevOps transformation. I was also responsible for their training and enablement group, lot of process improvement. So as you can see, every few years I have come out of my comfort level and did something new. That brings me to who I am and where I am with AWS. It has been a year and a half joining AWS as a customer solutions manager, and it has been wonderful. I love being part of my customers' digital transformation journey, being the glue to the team which can enable my customers.
Awesome. Thank you, Upasana. And over to you, Harshita. Tell us about your background, how you got into tech as well.
Thank you so much, Yusra, first of all. And it's amazing to listen to Aarti and Upasana's journey, how diverse their experiences are and how they joined AWS. So it's excellent to listen to that. So I did not have a computer science background. I did my undergrad in electronics engineering. And from India, I came to Connecticut. And I started my graduation studies in electrical engineering, but I was hard pressed to pay the bills. So every single day I used to drive to the college, and at the top of the bridge, I used to see this red umbrella logo. And it was so fascinating. I just loved that logo. I had no concept of what that logo belonged to, which company it is, what does the company do. But I thought I wanted to really apply to a job at this company. So I put my application in and I got a job as an entry-level programmer. And this exposure at Travelers, which is an insurance company, gave me the exposure to work with data, to look at the patterns in the data, and how do you derive insights from the data and enable the end user customers. This also provides the visibility as well as hands-on experience in architecting scalable data pipeline to integrate the data from a variety of data sources, bringing it into the hands of the end users who are completely using different products, different tool sets to consume this data at scale. Then I moved to a telecommunication industry completely from a different domain. This also gave me the experience to work to merge 3 different companies together on a common data platform, and how to serve customer operations, sales and marketing team, research and development team. And throughout this journey, I had worked on working with the lines of businesses to gather the functional requirement, but also technical requirement, and build benchmarks with clearly articulating the requirements, the success criteria, the objective, but also knowing what is needed today, what is needed in the future from data integration perspective, from a data warehousing, as well as consumption. And what this experience provided was the insight is for a particular business use case and the scale, which technology works and would not work. So knowing the pros and the cons. And this experience brought me to AWS. And I have been with AWS for last 5 years, and it's been an enriching experience to work how AWS is innovating on behalf of the customer, but above all, working with talented individuals, and it's a humbling experience to share and learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Harshita. So it's fascinating to see how the 3 of you have completely different journeys and to see the progression from where you started to where you are now. It's awesome to see. So just setting the stage before passing it over to you to tell your story. Overall, cloud adoption in semicon industry has been slower compared to other industries. And most the chip manufacturing steps and processes are being done using on-prem tools. And this team here has paved the way to modernize their manufacturing analytics platform using AWS solutions. In this episode, you'll hear about the journey from their on-prem solutions to Amazon Redshifts data lake implementation and architectural best practices to successfully achieve sub-second query performance at petabyte scale. The account manager, Aarti Comstock, will provide context on how this journey started and she'll share her superpowers to build critical relationships to advance the customer's goals. The CSM, Upasana Pandya, will share how to navigate through a complex situation where the customer thinks that the sky is falling by sharing tips that helped her overcome complex challenges. And the specialist solutions architect, Harshita Patel, will share Amazon Redshift architectural best practices and tips to achieve sub-second SLAs on critical queries. So Arti, why don't you start us off by setting the stage for us when you first started working with this customer?
Fortunately for me, I was asked to take over managing this account back in 2020. There was some shifts on their side, and we were introduced to this high-tech manufacturing firm as they had just kickstarted their 3-year transformation journey, and it had been developed with their selected partner. So my team was new to this scene, and the plan was fully baked already. So we were there to support them, guide them through delivery of that plan. This is where, as Upasana said, EQ really comes into play, listening to your customer. We were clearly told that a technology bake-off had been done the previous year regarding the data lake, and an architecture design utilizing an ISV solution had been signed off on as that plan for their singular data lake. So I heard them loud and clear. And what I heard was, Arti, don't tell us about Redshift's latest features. Don't suggest alternatives. We have a plan and timelines that we've already committed to our board. So we listened and we allowed them to proceed. So, as you know, part of Amazon's culture is focused on customer obsession. And I've learned first and foremost that listening to the customer is absolutely critical in building a relationship. So they proceeded forward with their data lake migration, and we were there along the way to provide resources and answer questions.
So it sounds like they had a well-developed plan for transformation. Are they following the typical pattern for semiconductors in terms of cloud adoption?
Great question. Typical. What is typical, right? Typically, high tech and semiconductor companies, they are laggards. If anything, what we've seen is they invest in point projects. They carve out maybe a very specific area of the business to modernize and advance, and they do so with great caution. So for my customer, it was pretty bold to have put a broad strokes transformation plan that encompassed so many different areas of their business for this industry. The reason that it is such a slow moving industry is standardization is really tough for this specific client, especially with their growth pattern through M&A. There's just such an intolerance for downtime or security breaches that I believe surpasses all other industries. The stakes are just higher. Everyone will say financial services has that same intolerance, but in FinServ, it doesn't take $10 to $20 billion to build a manufacturing center. It's very unique. The business risk for anything that impacts production was always front and center in every conversation I had with their leadership, even pre-pandemic in 2020, before all the supply chain challenges that we still are really aware of. Most companies believe that any kind of modernization is going to introduce a risk. So understanding their business and what's truly at stake was really critical to advance. In high-tech manufacturing, if you're familiar, most processes are, as you said, done by robots. If the robots were to stop, there could be $1 billion of work in process sitting on the production line. That is equivalent to $11,000 per second of risk. Pretty unique, big stakes. Their fabs have to operate like small cities with complete power plants on site so they can be independent. And as they consider what they're doing, it's that risk model and the security, which is unparalleled due to the IP, concerns around defense systems and missile operations compliance like FedRAMP and ITAR. So my guidance when working in this space is to always remember the bar to entry for any provider is very, very high. If you're the one leading the team, you have to ensure your resources that you bring in, they're familiar with what's at stake. They've been briefed. They're smart enough to ask questions when encountering something new and not assume they know. You've got to vet everybody. You've got to validate their knowledge and provide a lot of guidance before bringing somebody front and center to your customer.
Great. So exciting for you and the team, a lighthouse customer making a bold move for cloud adoption on AWS. So how did things look 1 year in?
Not great, unfortunately. 1 year later, the pipelines for data loading were unable to keep up with that volume of data, and milestones on the data lake build were consistently being missed. We were in really close discussions with the customer's lead architect, and our CSM was able to wedge the door open to see if they wanted to discuss alternatives, considering all the timelines were being missed. We heard their struggles with the solution that they were moving towards and they agreed it was worth the conversation with our Redshift services team. So, from those early conversations with the leaders of the transformation program, we committed to doing a very small pilot with a very tight core group of folks that would include a daily cadence. They gave us 10 days. That's it. It was very specific, it was bounded. They needed to quickly identify the need to pivot to a new plan or fail and fail fast. But it was very successful and resulted in a professional services engagement that included a full assessment of what it would take to truly pivot their data lake to AWS Redshift.
Wow. So sounds like it was a very trying time for the customer and high stress as well. Tell me a little bit about how you navigated relationships specifically with both the customer and the partners that you were working with to have them move forward in a very different direction than the original plan.
So the earning trust piece was making sure they knew that I truly understood what was happening. I understood that they were trying to capture data from literally thousands of tools that are used in a manufacturing process. These data bits were everything from when a tool would start, when it would stop, what the air pressure was. We were basically collecting 1 million records per second, literally billions of records that we were trying to load in to these tables 24/7 that could get queried by managers so that they could make critical decisions about their business. So earning trust meant truly understanding what it meant if this didn't work and what the effects were. And there was already sensitivity with a partner in play that developed a plan that did the original bake off, and now we'd be pivoting from that. So that relationship with the partner became really important to stay in very close conversations. So it was constant communication, it was transparency with the partner and the customer leadership overall in the program, making sure nobody had side agendas, nobody's taking sides. We would let the data drive our decision in how to take this client forward. Ultimately, we're all focused on their goals. So, one thing that I've really learned from my colleagues here is to be upfront, to align on our partner principles. We all know that the partner wants to move workloads to AWS, but we have such a wide portfolio of solutions and ISV relationships. So, we have to take the perspective of what's going to work for the customer and let the data drive our decisions and build the plan from there. So, Yusra, my part had its challenges in navigating relationships and business objectives and committed timelines. But the real credit has to be given to Upasana. As she said, she's the glue, and Harshita for this success, because they had the real challenge of ensuring that the technology could actually deliver what was piloted from the early stages.
Awesome. Thanks, Arthi. And that's a good segue, which brings me into Upasana's role as the customer solutions manager on the account. Upasana, I know that role often comes into play at AWS with complex migrations. Would you say that this was a scenario you stepped into here?
Absolutely, Yusra. I mean, in many ways, it was a perfect storm. And let me start from here. I was on my 4th or 5th month of my tenure with AWS. I had just finished my 90-day onboarding. I was so eager to jump into this acceleration journey. And I joined the first call, and then I told myself that it is a perfect storm from many, many reasons, right? One is, as Aarti suggested, right, there were two parts of the equation. One is the ingestion part, which was working very well. Data, billions and billions of raw from various IoT sensors all over the globe were ingesting data to Redshift data lake. And actually, that process was 3 times faster than their original on-prem solution. So that part was great. The second part, where the consumption layer, we had several challenges. And the entire team was up against very aggressive deadline because of the renewal coming up for their on-prem licenses. So there were severe financial implications on the client side had we missed this deadline. And as you can understand, as a result of all this stress and the looming deadlines, the customer sentiment was like bright red, very, very red. It was very high stress situation, emotional, right? And so many questions. If you really feel, right, going back to my emotional intelligence part, there was a trust issue, that there was questions that whether we will be able to achieve the sub-second level SLA or not. And then from on AWS perspective, it was a huge reputational risk. Had we missed these deadlines, there were many other key workloads that were lined up to move on the AWS cloud. So from a customer obsession perspective, and also for the future of the customer's migration journey on the AWS cloud, it was a huge reputational risk. But I'm happy to say that despite all these severe challenges, we call it #OneTeam, which includes key customer leads, Harshida, and many other Redshift services team and the account team overcame that challenge. And we finally met those deadlines on time. We went live, which we'll talk a little bit more as the story progresses. But in summary, it was a very high stress situation and we were in a perfect storm.
Awesome. Thanks, Upasana. And tell us how you navigated through this complex situation.
Yeah, now too, I wish I had a magic wand, right, that just did the trick. But we all know there is not one single wand that does the trick. But if I really look back, what worked for me personally as a CSM, and I hope that this works for many of our viewers as well as my fellow CSM, is step number 1, customer obsession and earn trust. As Aarti also suggested, and I'm going to reiterate it a little bit because that is very, very important, is you have to listen to your customer, right? You listen. And I will go even one step further and say with empathy, because when you are in this high stress situation, it could be harsh things to hear, right? Those questions, why it's not working, when are we going to meet this deadline, will we be able to meet this deadline? And for anybody in that situation, probably the normal tendency would be to be defensive or to take a position or to create a checklist of what was in the scope and what was not in the scope, etc. And I personally never did that, at least not in that moment. That moment is very important, that your customer feel that they are heard, that you understand them. And I always put myself in their situation and say, if I was in their shoes, I'd probably react the same way. But while you are doing that, you quickly turn the focus of the discussion from those emotions, from sentiments, to a data-driven story. So you decouple two things, remove the noise, and then really start deep dive in the situation and start putting together some artifact. It could be a slide, it could be a Asana board, it could be some metrics. So in this particular example, the perfect storm was we were not meeting the SLA. So we said, we hear you. We are not meeting sub-second level SLA, but let's create a list of about 15 or 20 most commonly used use cases, right? What's your baseline, right, that we should meet and put together side by side where we are. So soon those conversations turn from not meeting SLA to, and I'm making these numbers up, but let's say 20 use cases, 5 we are meeting the SLA, 5 we are not meeting, but we are barely over by a second. So maybe that's negotiable. And 5 we are doubling it. So let's focus on 5. That's a showstopper. So turning those conversations from sky is falling to a path forward and exactly providing the data point really helped me to earn trust with my customer. And that's the step 1. And while you are doing that, communication is key. There is no such thing as over communication. transparently communicate within customer leadership at various levels and within AWS, between CSM leadership, account team leadership, and also the services team leadership, because they are your partner. Transparently communicate with everybody where you are and what is the path forward. That really helped me quickly earn trust of my customer, and we had a path forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Upasana. And tell us what strategies you've leveraged to adopt. So, what strategies you adopted to overcome challenges?
That's a great question. And that's a great segue also from my previous discussion about high level things that work for me. As a team, we implemented a couple of things which really helped us to meet this deadline. First and foremost, I used to call it personally virtual war rooms, but the name doesn't matter. It's a daily touch point. Once I had the backlog of all the items that needs to be done, we analyzed it and we tried to do things in parallel to the extent possible to meet this aggressive deadline. So early on, when I joined this engagement, the team used to meet once a day. But then soon after that, we started having these virtual war rooms twice a day with 2 different work stream identified, right? So that helped us ultimate deadline. Then we put a little bit of more structure and rigor to this virtual war room. So we had a really detailed tracking mechanisms in place. So when everybody left the room, everybody knew what are their dependencies, what are they supposed to do, and what is the implication, so that they can let other people know, we can escalate accordingly. So having that structure really helped us. And third is mainly for a CSM, and it's very important in my opinion, is I call storytelling, right? Put together a compelling story about why this customer is very important, why this project is very important, and put together data points so that you can get appropriate level of support, especially where situation where we were in, we had multiple escalation, and we are so thankful to the Redshift services team that they supported us wholeheartedly, and tremendous amount of support from so many SMEs and the private patch. And we were able to do that because we had, in a way, we had a compelling story. So make sure your services team that you are depending on, they are part of your journey and they are your partners. And then last thing is, as a CSM, I always wanted to make sure that I provide enough information, as detailed as possible, to my fellow SMEs so that they can be productive. So how do you bring the productivity of the team? Remember, this team is global. So even if for a minor information or the dependency, you could easily lose a day or two. So having that plan and being proactive and doing everything that you could do to improve the productivity of this team. So those are some of the strategies which really help this team meet the deadline.
Awesome. And how did the solution help with fab productivity at the end of the day?
Yes, so it's an interesting question, and I am very passionate about what future holds now, so that all the data from various locations is in one data lake. It could be a gold mine for many things, such as it has already been the foundation for many artificial intelligence and machine learning use cases, which will further improve their processes, automation, and ultimately improve the yield of the fab. That's what they refer to as in semiconductor industry. The customer could also build upon this data lake on other, like such as data mesh, and that democratizing the data, and more this data is useful to the data scientists, many other business users, etc. So that would be very helpful. This data having in one platform, it also helps all the fabs bring consistency within their processes, which ultimately is very important for the semiconductor industry. And this is a lighthouse achievement, as Aarti was saying. Not many other semiconductor industry has been able to achieve it. So this is just a foundation of better things to come.
Thanks, Upasana, and thanks for sharing the journey here from the CSM's perspective. So this brings us over to Harshita. Harshita, tell us about the technical use cases here.
Absolutely. As Aarti and Upasana reiterated, listen to the customers. So the key thing was to listen to the customers, dive deep before jumping to solutions and conclusions. So while capturing the use cases and as also working with the engagement, the use cases and the requirements and the SLAs were also pivoting. So as Upasana described, data ingestion was working great with AWS, with Amazon Redshift, as well as AWS S3 as their data lake was providing them the ingestion, which was 3x faster. But the core use cases was, since the origination of this data, which is from the IoT devices, collecting that data, curating that data, and making that data available for analytics to the end user had a fixed SLA of less than 30 minutes. So not only the data ingestion was great, but what it takes to transform that data, make that data available to end user was one critical part, which is ETL, extract, transform, load, making that performant. But above all, each end users were also using different products to consume this data. And one critical application was the customer had developed a web interface for the end users to run analytics. And because this is web interface, they wanted that interactive performance time so that the end users get their responses in sub-seconds and they are able to get insight into the data very fast and they can make decisions based on that. And the user base was all spread across the continent. So you also have to take into consideration when the end users are running the analytics, there is network latency that comes into picture. So to summarize from the use case perspective is one, data ingestion, making the entire data pipeline scalable, as well as meeting the performance and the SLAs required by the end users to consume that data. So this data, the use case is expanded. And one on top of that, they also had a critical use case that the end users needed the ability to run operational analytics on their transactional data sources. And those queries should also be served in seconds and sub-second response time.
So what was the scale of data and end user expectations?
So it's always fascinating, right? When you work with customers who are in the manufacturing space, they're collecting data from IoT at scale. So every single day, the data that was ingested was 10 terabytes, which can equate to 100 billion records in any given table. So this was the rate of ingestion. But also from an end user perspective, the number of end users were 500 to thousands of end users trying to run analytics on this data at the same time, while the data was getting loaded, transformed, and the consumption is at scale 500 to thousands of users across the continents.
Wow, that's massive. So could you share with us the architecture implemented on AWS using analytics services?
Absolutely. So working backwards from the customer, not only taking into account what their current needs are, but also considering as their data is going to grow, as their user base is going to grow, as their mixed workload complexity is going to grow, is enabling the customers by making choices with AWS services, purpose-built choices. So from a data store perspective, Amazon Simple Storage Service, serving as their data lake, which provides them the scalability as the volume of the data increases, but also the durability. Amazon Redshift as the data warehousing store, data store. But with Amazon Redshift also provided them the capability to directly query their data in their data lake. And to serve the use case for transactional source system, Amazon Aurora, which is very tailored and catered as a purpose-built data store for transactional processing. And from an end user perspective, providing a unified view. So whether they are running a query, that query could be using the data from Amazon Redshift, the data could be coming from the data lake, or the data can also be joined to the operational data store. So using purpose-built services provided them the scalability, the performance, and at price performance. Because as Aarti described, the heart and the center for all this conversation and pivoting to a different solution was also needs to be cost optimized. So looking at this is enabling the customers with purpose-built AWS services and using EMR for big data processing. So that provided the scale as the data volume increases or if they have to do historical reprocessing of their data.
Awesome. And could you share with us some best practices that enabled the customer?
Absolutely. So it's embracing AWS leadership principle. One is customer obsession, keeping at front and center customer success. The end goal is always to make and enable the customer so they are able to derive their business outcomes. But diving deep, so as Aarti and Upasana described, there were challenges, but it's peeling the layers of the onion and going to the core root of where the challenges are in the data pipeline, right? Focusing, laser focused on what the SLAs are and not deviating from that. So taking a step back as a solution architect, and as all of you solution architects, it's having the grit and being vocally self-critical, listening to the customers when they are saying, this does not work or this is not performant, but taking a step back. What can be addressed immediately versus what will require partnership from the Amazon Redshift service team? And being the voice of the customer to share, these are the areas that we would need to enable this customer and the service team partnering with you to put those features as part of the product. So it not only helped this customer, but it's also helping thousands of other customers using Amazon Redshift for these specific use cases. Secondly, is you have the SLA, but providing full transparency to the customer that let's not just focus on data ingestion performance, but let's also focus and bring in the concurrency requirement from consumption. Let's also bring that into the mix to benchmark. Let's do the benchmark with price performance. So they have the data points. They know which particular implementation is going to provide them the scale, but at price performance, enabling them to make data-driven decision. So that was one of the key aspects to work with the customer. And working as one team, it's not about one individual. Listening to the customers, working with Aarti, Upasana, as well as I'd like to call out Edel Kunle, Richard, as well as Dhaval, who were partners in this entire journey to enable this customer. So one of the best practices with AWS services that just adding hardware to the problem is not the solution, because that comes at a price. So if there are fine-tuned knobs that you can refine to squeeze out the extra performance with the existing compute capacity is what we worked the customer. We enable them sharing all these best practices and making them self-sufficient to own the solution that was built.
Awesome. Harshita, thank you so much for walking us through the technical use cases and best practices leveraged and architectural best practices as well. Upasana, thank you for walking us through how you navigated the complex situation here to drive the journey forward. And Aarti, thank you so much for setting the context on how this journey all started and how you navigated relationships with critical stakeholders here. Thank you all for joining us today and sharing your story. It's absolutely incredible to hear how you've managed to create this and move this forward in such a short amount of time. That's wonderful. And thanks to our audience members for tuning in and joining on this episode. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Yusra.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure. Thank you.
Fantastic team.
Bye, everyone.